if we go with the 1%, I think that works out roughly that there may be 70 million people in the world who stutter, which I think is more than the populations of Germany, South Africa, Indonesia. So if you imagine, those countries, if we imagine a country of only people who stutter, how would that look? How would that feel?
Welcome to Some Stutter Law, a podcast by the NLSA Collaborative. Some Stutter Law is Newfoundland and Labrador's first podcast about living with language disorders. We speak directly to people living with speech and language disorders and others such as speech-language pathologists, researchers, educators, and family members. We use inclusive language and themes to help rebuild confidence and hope by dismantling myths, stigma, stereotypes, and barriers. My name is Greg O'Grady, and I am a person who stutters and a co-host of Some Stutter Law, Newfoundland and Labrador's first podcast about communication disorders, along with my co-hosts.
And I'm Katelyn Mayo. I'm a speech-language pathology student, and I'm Greg's co-host on this podcast.
Some Stutter Law mission is dismantling and rebuilding stuttering. Let's start listening. Some Stutter Law mandate is in the spirit of Newfoundland and Labrador's humor, robust and frank interactive discussions. Some Stutter Law podcast aims to rebuild confidence and hope for today's and tomorrow's persons who live with speech, language, and or communication stigmas, stereotypes, and barriers.
The objectives of Some Stutter Law podcast are raising awareness, education, understanding, and acceptance of stuttering and communication disorders within our province by providing support, current information, research, and resources about stuttering, raising awareness that communication disorders are a quality of life issue. Throughout life, stuttering and other communication impairments can impact a person's life emotionally, educationally, physically, socially, and vocationally. Some Stutter Law podcast is a safe space where guests can be themselves without fear of being judged.
Today, Some Stutter Law welcomes Dr. Ronan Miller. Dr. Miller Dr. Miller was born in Nottingham, UK, and after graduating from Nottingham Trent University, he moved to Spain to try and learn the language and engage with some anxieties he had as a result of stuttering. After a few years there, he went back to studying, and in 2020, he was awarded his PhD in specific dialects by the University of Valencia, where his doctoral research focused on anxiety, identity, and self-concept in people who stutter while being involved in learning English as a foreign language. Dr. Miller moved to the University of Reading to work with Dr. David Ward as a postdoctoral research assistant on a project exploring the development and use of BeneTalk, a mobile application to support people who stutter. The funding for his project had just ended, and he had now moved to BeneTalk to work with Jody as a content and community manager. Dr. Miller has also been involved in a number of stuttering initiatives on a volunteer basis. These include a hosting role on Stutter Social, collaborating with the Spanish Stuttering Foundation, Stamina and 50 Million Voices, and being involved in a recent mentoring program run by Actions for Stammering Children. If you like to view more of his work and publications, you can find this information on www.ronanmiller.me. So, Dr. Miller, welcome to Some Stutter Law. Now, this is, you are quite the busy man. I can see now. So, just just to provide an overview to our listeners, would you share a little bit about yourself as a person who stutters, and then your current work?
Yeah, of course. Thank you as well for having me here and giving me the opportunity to talk to you. It's a privilege and honor always to talk about stammering, so happy to do that. I guess me as a person who stutters, or stammers, as we say in the UK, I've stuttered all my life. At certain points in my life, it was something that was a struggle for me, caused me some hard times, I guess. But at other points in my life, I found it to be almost a blessing in allowing me to connect with others around the world who also stutter. And as you said in your introduction, a big thing for me in my life was when I moved to Spain from the UK at the age of 22, just after graduating university. And that was an important moment for me because one of the reasons I specifically did that was to engage with some of the struggles I had in relation to stammering. I also had a lifelong dream of learning another language, which I felt like stuttering had held me back from to a certain extent when I was at school. And I was quite determined to pursue that, at least to try. And I was very fortunate to receive some excellent speech therapy from the NHS in the UK, the National Health Service. So we could talk a bit about that later, if that's of interest. I know you guys have an interest in health therapy is delivered as well to people who stammer. So at that point in my life, largely because of that therapy, I felt able to engage with such a challenging thing, such as a move to a new country. I didn't speak the language, so that was a big thing. And then from that point onwards, my two loves, I guess, and it's interesting that I say loves, but I guess languages and stammering are my two big loves at this point in my life. So at that point, I was able to combine the two and begin to kind of think about those two things more combined together. I have to say, having said that, when I did move to Spain, I wasn't at the same place. I wasn't in the same place as I am now in regard to my speech. So, it's very much been a process of small steps for me, in terms of opening up first about stuttering, feeling comfortable talking about it, engaging with situations in which I knew I would stutter, but learning that was okay, and steadily progressing in that way to a point where now I spend all day talking about stuttering, reading about stuttering. My job is related to stuttering, as you alluded to in the intro too. And I also enjoy, talking to other people who stutter in any context, and if it's in a context where I could be helpful, then that's all of them better.
Doctor, you had submitted the final version of your thesis titled "Anxiety and Self-Related Constructs in Learners Who Stutter in the Learning of English as a Foreign Language," and this was submitted, I believe, last month. So would you like to talk a little bit about that? Because I'm sure that our listeners, as well as Katelyn and I, are really interested in finding a little bit more about this.
Yeah, of course. So I submitted my thesis actually at the beginning of 2020. So that was when I defended my, as we say in Spain, I defended the thesis, which means I stood up in front of an expert panel and presented the work I'd done and took questions. So that was January 2020. So I feel like a lot's happened since then, but I'll go back to that point. And my thesis was, as you say, based around anxiety and exploring the experiences of people who stutter in learning English as a foreign language. And the inspiration came around a bit from my own experiences. I taught English whilst I was in Spain. So I was teaching English, I was also learning Spanish, and I was a person who stammers. So, you know, all of those things were kind of combining at the same time within me. But at that point, I also was beginning to get involved more and more with different stammering organizations and communities. And I came to learn that for many people in different parts of the world, if they are unable to progress with their English learning, if English wasn't their first language, then that could have serious repercussions for their future. You know, they were unable to access higher education or jobs and things like that. So I was doing this in the context of Spain, and I know that is the case in Spain, and my feeling is that it's also the case in other areas of the world. So I began to realize, you know, this was the issue potentially for people who stutter, and that maybe their needs, our needs, weren't being taken into consideration in the context of foreign language learning, which concerned me. And I became aware that there was very little research in the area that had already been done. So I had no intention, you know, I talked a little bit previously about moving to Spain and things like that. I had absolutely no intention when I moved to Spain to begin a PhD, but it felt like my life and my experiences led me to that point, and in a way I felt like I was in the right place at the right time to do that piece of work. And from my own experiences, I was able to present, I guess, an insider perspective, but also I was also very aware that just my own experiences don't necessarily speak to those of the rest of the community. So the PhD was about engaging with people who stammer in Spain, talking to them. So it was a mixed methods approach, which means we collected data from people both through things like questionnaires and surveys. So things like, you know, mark 1 to 5 to indicate how anxious you feel in a certain situation. So we collected data that way, but also I sat down with people and we'd do what's called semi-structured interviews, which are conversations. And I had a number of questions that I wanted to ask people, but those conversations are also free to be improvised as well, and I could follow the lead of the person I was speaking to. So when you combine both of those ways of collecting data, you can get some quite interesting insights, I think. And for me, it was a real pleasure being able to sit down with people who stutter in Spain and talk to them about their experiences learning English. And I did, I think all in all, about 15 interviews with people that were averaged about an hour or so. But some, you know, was as long as 2 hours if the conversation was really flowing. So that's how I went about things. And my intention there was really just to shed a light on, or to give a voice in a way to people who stutter, to talk about their experiences. Anxiety as an emotion in foreign language learning is a established line of research, and I think most people, whether they stutter or not, if they have experience learning a foreign language, have experienced some sensation of anxiety. So that's quite a common line of research, but research with people who stutter is a underrepresented area there. And my concern, as I said earlier, was that our needs weren't being met. So lots of classroom practices don't take into consideration the fact that there might be people who stutter in the class, which means that if you are anxious about stuttering and also anxious about learning a language, then you can quite quickly experience, a quite strong, I guess, fusion of those two sources of anxiety that can lead to your learning being affected. If we're anxious, then we generally don't learn well. Our brains are focused on other things, and it's not easy for us to accept new information. And learning a language is about being receptive to new information, but it's also about being able to produce in the language when you need to do. And if you're a person who stutters and you are asked to stand up in class and read or engage in a role play situation or asked to speak, sometimes that can be a really challenging exercise. And my concern was that lots of people who stutter would be put off learning a language, even if they may want to, if they may need to, they would find the process too stressful, which is a shame, really, because not only is language learning important when we think about things like job opportunities and opportunities for education, etc. It's also a beautiful thing in terms of our social interaction and allows us to engage with people who maybe we otherwise wouldn't, see things from a different perspective. And of course, if we are lucky enough to travel, then it can help there as well. So for all of those reasons, I thought it was an important piece of work for me to do. And I guess I can discuss a bit of the findings that we came to. And not surprisingly, we compared the rates of anxiety in a group of people who stuttered compared to a group of people who did not. So this was, again, in the Spanish context. So all of these findings were true for these groups of people in this context, and I'm fairly confident that they would be repeated in other contexts as well. But that's the great thing about science. These things have to be tested to be proved true. So it seemed to make sense to me that a group of people who stutter would experience higher anxiety than people who don't stutter in the language classroom. But I couldn't find any evidence to support this that had previously been published. So we tested that, and we found that was the case. And as you may imagine, those I guess the peaks of anxiety occurred in things like speaking aloud in front of the class. Being asked to read aloud in front of the class was a particular spike. But interestingly, we found that people who stutter experience less anxiety than their non-stuttering peers in exercises related to writing and listening. So in most language learning, in most foreign language learning, you have a divide, I guess, between speaking, reading, writing, listening. These are different skills that we try and teach students. And it was interesting to me that people who stutter experience less anxiety there in listening and writing, which may be explained by the fact that sometimes it's easier for us potentially to listen as opposed to speak and to speaking. I think lots of people who stammer will relate to that idea of wanting to speak perhaps but not feeling able to, so accepting the role as a listener instead. So that was interesting. And then in terms of the interviews that we did, so I did interviews only with people who stutter. So at that point, it was about drilling down more into this and getting a greater level of detail from people, and really being able to find out things that you may get a sense of through numbers and statistics, but you get a much truer sense, I think, of those things when people are able to explain those things to you in their own words. So this was really, I found it a fascinating process to speak to people. Some of these people have since gone on to learn English, to a high standard and use English at work, etc. But I think it was a commonality amongst almost everyone, was that it could be a real struggle at times for them to feel comfortable in the context of a foreign language class. And the things they said supported the statistical analysis that we did. Standing up in front of a class having to read was difficult. Being put on the spot to engage in certain speaking situations was difficult as well. And most people in Spain begin learning English quite young. So in around the age of, I guess, depending on your school, but let's say around the age of 6 or 7. So I was talking to adults who stutter, so they had this lifelong experience of learning English. And at school, growing up, learning to understand your stutter and feeling comfortable about it and understanding what's happening within you, I think is a real challenge for some people. And that's why things like this podcast are great. I think the more we talk about stuttering, hopefully the more young people who stutter will also feel able to speak about it. So the people I spoke to whilst doing my research had a lot of stories, where they had found it extremely difficult. They'd been marked down sometimes by teachers as a result of their stammer. They'd been held back in classes because their stutter was misunderstood as a lack of understanding or a lack of proficiency, which is a great shame. When I was speaking to these people about their anxiety, but when you start speaking to people about anxiety, it's kind of like you're opening a trapdoor into all this other stuff, right? So from that point, our conversations would often touch on things like identity and self-concept, these type of ideas, where if you imagine a person who stutters, who's marked down or isn't able to progress, or they fail exams, for example, because they stutter, and the teacher who's examining them isn't knowledgeable about stuttering, or hasn't been trained to provide specific help or guidance to students who stutter, then that person who's failed an exam is quite easy to understand of why they would come to a point where they maybe blame their stutter for holding them back, maybe reject their identity as a person who stutters, and would try and do as much as they can really to move away from that. So I mean, on the surface, my thing was about anxiety, but really what happens is you talk to people and you realize just how deep, these things are for people, and how much angst, those type of experiences can create. So I tried to structure the thesis in a way where these problems were presented, these struggles were presented, because it is important to give those things time, and put those things out there, and allow people's voices to be heard. But also I got a real sense of the resilience of these people, and also the humor that they applied to a lot of these situations. So as the thesis progresses, I try and shed more and more light on, maybe some of the things that these people do that are actually worth celebrating, and the fact that all of these people stuck with the language. They talked to me about, different things they would do in the class just to make sure they were able to be there and participate despite all of this anxiety they may feel. I think it really speaks to how people who stammer are able to adapt and make progress, even when we're in these contexts where his fluent speech isn't accepted, and is quite often penalized if you think about exams and that kind of thing. So yeah, it was a real journey for me, and I was extremely grateful to talk with these people, because I feel like that process was also an important one for me. Just being able to learn from others and hear those stories as well.
Yeah, I'm really glad that research is happening, because you're right. I've looked, and it's lacking in the literature research in this area. And so I just kind of wanted to ask, as somebody who has learned other languages, and as somebody who has been a teacher of other languages, learning a language is very challenging. I'm wondering, aside from the anxiety and the enhanced anxiety that a person who stutters may feel, based on your own experiences or your research, are there any other aspects of the language learning process that are kind of more notably different for people who stutter?
That's a great question. So my feeling is that I feel that maybe people who stutter are better language learners than they give themselves credit for. I think we, as people who stutter, and this is unfortunate, but I think we sometimes define our progress, or how we, something, the success, I guess, of our interactions by how fluent we are, which is something personally I've learned to completely eradicate from my own thinking. But I do understand that living in the kind of world that we do, people can be inclined to think that way, and I think it's understandable. My hope is that we can move away from that kind of thinking as a community, and also encourage the wider community as well to move away from that kind of thinking. And if you think about language learning, often it's the same thing. So if you meet someone and I'll say, for example, I lived in Spain for a long time, they'll ask me, are you fluent in Spanish then? And of course, I understand what they're trying to say. What they're trying to say is, do you have a good knowledge of the language? Are you able to use it in different contexts? Are you able to have a conversation, etc., 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 etc.? Which is all true. I am able to do that, but I'm 100% not fluent in Spanish because I stutter, and I stutter more in Spanish than I do in English. So, I think there's that aspect there that in both cases we can maybe define progress by fluency, which isn't always helpful. So I say that to say that I think lots of people who stammer may feel that they're not a good language learner purely down because of not being able to maybe speak with the fluency that they may wish to, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're not a good language learner. And I think a lot of us have internalized, I guess, a set of processes that that we use to kind of counteract against moments of stammering. So I know lots of people who stammer will employ synonyms for words that they find a bit difficult. People I've spoken to, describe themselves as synonym queens and kings. If you say one word, they have hundreds of options that they could use at any one time. Which I know that in the world of speech therapy, we encourage people not to avoid and to say what they want to say. But at the same time, we also have to acknowledge that, these behaviors are there. And if you think about that from a language learning perspective, having a wide vocabulary and being able to, I guess, engage in some kind of linguistic gymnastics on demand, that's a great skill set if you're learning a language. So I do think some people who stammer have these type of skills that if we reframe them from a language learning perspective can actually be really powerful. And I guess that was also something I wanted to move towards with the thesis as well, of encouraging people who stammer to engage with these situations and also giving them new ways potentially to think about how to engage, new frames of thinking, and not just I won't succeed in learning a language because I can't be fluent. So I do think that for us, if we are able to be in a situation where, for example, the language teacher is aware that we stutter, is supportive, is happy to adapt the class when necessary, as should be the case for all students, and I think also that if we, by adapting, let's see how I can explain this clearly. I think quite often by adapting the way we live to be more inclusive, we benefit not only the people we are directly adapting for, but also everybody else. So, for example, if we take the example of having an elevator in a building, this is a necessity because we want people who aren't able to climb stairs to be able to access higher floors. But it's also extremely helpful for others as well, right? So I think if we are able to adapt things to accommodate people who stammer in a more inclusive way, this will also benefit everybody else in the space as well. So yeah, I hope that answered the question.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's it. It's a great perspective. I loved hearing that. One quick follow-up question is, so if somebody asked you, because you live in Spain, are you fluent in Spanish? What would be a different word or a different way to phrase that would be better?
I mean, I completely understand the question, and I don't take any exception with it. It was just, I guess, a reflection I had during the time, and in a way, sometimes I engage with it, and sometimes I say, no, I'm not fluent because I stutter, you know, and it can actually be a opening to a broader conversation. But I guess, I don't know, it's a hard one. I mean, the word used within the language learning and teaching, you know, context, we will talk about being proficient in a language, or, you know, advanced, but that's not really a great way to express it just in everyday terms. I guess, do you know Spanish? I don't know. Really, I don't know the answer. So if either of you have an answer, or if anyone who listens to the podcast has an answer, perhaps we can brainstorm as a group.
Something to think about for sure.
Exactly.
You know, I'm wondering, Doctor, as a person who stutters, and I agree so much that, you know, our sense of self-worth, identity is so tied up in with fluency, communication, language. Now, listening to you, well, you know, do you have plans on like turning turning what what your thesis is about into like a support self-help book or something? Just wondering, because I'm sure this this information would would be a great support for people who stutter in all countries. So, do you have any plans of what you will be doing with this information?
Yes, 100%. Yeah, I would love to publish. I mean, the thesis is there. People can read it if they wish. It's not the easiest of reading, if I'm being honest. At times, you know, it can get quite dense and quite academic, and I understand that that's not an appealing genre for lots of people to read. Even myself, who's, you know, I've gone through the system in that sense, I still find it a challenge sometimes reading academic articles, etc. So I would love to do a book that's more accessible. I haven't been able to up to this point. As soon as I finished my thesis, I began working on the project you mentioned in the intro, and that work continues, and that job is quite demanding. We work hard over there at BeneTalk to try and progress things there, which in a way I feel like some of the objectives I have personally, some of the things that I would like to help with, if I can, in terms of the stuttering community, I feel like can be achieved through that project, in terms of, you know, supporting people and helping people maybe think differently about their speech. And as you say, you know, I also volunteer for a number of different initiatives as well. So it's a hard one, because I feel like sometimes my time is better spent doing those things, which are real kind of one. You are speaking to people. You can really engage with people on a personal level. If you think about things like mentoring or Stutters Social, which is an online support group. So sometimes it's easier to put your focus there, I think, than to take a step back and write. But 100% it's something I'd like to do in the future. And as you say, I think it's worthwhile pursuing that, because, I mean, if we think about it, there's more people who stutter in the world who are bilingual, potentially, or multilingual, monolingual. So this issue of language learning and potentially not progressing is a big one, I think.
The doctor, just to change topics for a minute. I actually read somewhere that this I believe came from the Stammering Association, that there was some research done in terms of the numbers of people who stutter in the world. Like, I always wonder, where did the 1% of the population come from? But I understand that you're involved, or there's a new research done which states that there may be about 3%. You want to share a little bit about that?
Yes, of course. Yeah. So I can't take any credit at all for that research. That research was done by Stammer in the UK, who were previously known as the British Stammering Association. So Stammer are doing some great things over there. And I don't know if people have seen their most recent October 22nd campaign, which was all about highlighting the need for stuttering voices to be heard on the TV, on the radio, in the news, not just to talk about stuttering, but just as an everyday thing, an everyday voice, which I support. So Stammer did a survey. So in the UK, quite often surveys are done with a large group of people to get kind of a public opinion on a certain topic. So these aren't surveys, these are surveys done purely for research purposes, and they're done for all kinds of reasons. And Stammer, I think, quite intelligently approached one of these companies that do these type of surveys, and wanted to get a picture of the number of people who stammer in the UK. And I know this was because we have this idea of 1% that's, floats around, and most articles you read about stammering will, refer to this number. But I know that Stammer had a feeling that maybe that was a low estimate, and that potentially there was a almost a hidden group of people who stammer who may not come forward for stammering research, may not talk about stammering. People who they know may not even know that they stammer. They may be very able to hide their stammering. And the only way really to find out about this would be to have some kind of anonymous nationwide survey. So that is what Stammer did, and the results they got back were that, yeah, around 3% of the people who responded have a stammer, and that 3% refers to both people who consider themselves to have an overt stammer, so a stammer that other people are able to see, but also people who, I guess the terminology that's used is covert stammering or interiorized stammering, who are able to hide their stammer from most people. So in that sense, I'm inclined to, accept that 3%. I think it seems to me to be a good way of collecting data. And I know that for me personally, and I know a lot of others as well, we often have conversations with people who say they stuttered as a kid, but they don't stutter anymore. But when you begin to probe a bit more, they do still stutter. They just don't see it as something that really affects their life anymore. And they're not, they wouldn't be engaged necessarily with anything that's happening in the stuttering world. But they are people who stutter. So yeah, I think there's a broad range there, and I think it's also important that people who have an interiorized stutter or a covert stutter are also able to feel part of the community, and are also able to reach out for support if they feel they need to, regardless of their, again, fluency. Sometimes I know that for some people who have an interiorized stutter, they feel like their fluency is too high for them to be considered a person who stutters. But again, it's not about the fluency. So yeah, so that's, I think, where we're at. It would be really interesting to see if those numbers were replicated in other parts of the world. But I'm not sure, for example, how in Canada or India or Australia or the United States, how the estimation of numbers of people who stutter are made.
Where would we find this research, Doctor? Where would our listeners go to find this?
So in the UK, well, Stammer is the British Stammering Association. Okay, so their website is Stammer, which is STAMMA, stammer.org. And they are very open with everything that they do. So they have a section on their website about stammering, and you will see there more information about the research that they've done. Generally speaking, these type of things are in textbooks or in scientific articles, but I think stammering associations all around the world are doing a great job of bringing this type of information out of those, more academic contexts and into places where more people are able to engage with that information. And I think that's a great thing as well. I think the more we understand stammering as people who stammer, the more knowledge we have about why we stammer, perhaps, and other people who stammer. I think that can only be a good thing. And me personally, if you think about these numbers, if we go with the 1%, I think that works out roughly that there may be 70 million people in the world who stutter, which I think is more than the populations of Germany, South Africa, Indonesia. So if you imagine, those countries, if we imagine a country of only people who stutter, how would that look? How would that feel? And I think these are, a lot of people who stutter and struggle feeling that they're the only ones. It can be quite an isolating experience. So I think this idea of a global stuttering community is a really powerful one. So I think it's important also that people are aware that they're not alone.
Well, Doctor, we have lots of lots more questions to ask you, but I think we'll not hold you up for too much longer. Katelyn, do you have any more questions for Doctor?
I actually did want to ask one more.
Yes, please.
Just as somebody who experienced going to speech therapy while learning a language, did you have any advice for SLPs who might be working with individuals who are learning a second language? Are there any kind of tools and things that might be extra helpful?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. So when I had speech therapy in English in England, and found that to be helpful. The aspect of that actually that I found to be most helpful wasn't the speech aspect of it, even though we call it speech therapy. You know, it was more how I think about stuttering, how I react to stuttering, if I stutter or if I see other people stuttering, and those kind of things. So I had support for my stutter in English, and then I moved to Spain, and I was finding that I was able to transfer some of that across to Spanish, but there was a point for sure where I felt like, okay, I'd love to have that same support I had before, but now in Spanish. And honestly, I wasn't able to find that, but I think that feeling that I had led me or motivated me to engage with this stammering community in Spain, which was a great help. And a lot of the community there is great friends of mine, and I, the support I felt from the community there was a huge reason why I was able to feel comfortable in Spain and comfortable with the language as well. I think for speech therapists who are working with people who stutter, who use different languages, I would encourage them to encourage the people they work with to reach out to the communities who use that language as their primary language, and encourage them to engage with any social events that may be happening, or share their experiences with people in those communities. If the speech therapist themselves doesn't speak the other language, then I understand it can be a real challenge. But I think the community there can be a great help in that sense. And I guess the emotions that we feel are maybe independent of the language. So I would hope that speech therapists are not just focusing on speech and also engaging with all kinds of emotions, not just ones that we may feel are challenging, like anxiety and these type of things, but also, how does it feel to engage with the community? Are you able to, is there anything that you enjoy there? Those type of questions. So I think to a certain extent, support in that area in terms of emotions and things can be independent of the language that we use. And I know that was the case for me. But yeah, it's a challenge, because it was a challenge for me being able to access speech therapy in a new country, and understand why it would be a challenge for speech therapists who aren't bilingual to be able to just take that on board as well. Honestly, I think I would have benefited from having some kind of professional support in the language. So I know that's probably I say I would have benefited from that, because I wasn't really able to. I did meet speech therapists through the Stammering Association, and I was able to talk with them, but I never received speech therapy formally in that context. So I know that's a challenge, and it's probably the most unlikely scenario, but I think it would have been helpful for me at least. So I think, with that being said, and how unlikely and how difficult it is for people to access any kind of support, it's not a case where we can pick and choose, really. I do think that the community there comes in and plays a huge role, and I think that speech therapists should encourage their clients to, reach out and attend events and things like that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was a great answer.
If you have any more questions, then please, I'm not in any rush, so.
No, we'll close now, Doctor. But we will be having you back again. Okay, and so
Fantastic. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I had a question for you guys actually that I forgot to ask.
For sure. Did you want to?
Is there still time?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So someone, and excuse my ignorance, but as someone who isn't from your area of the world, I wondered if one or both of you could explain the title of your podcast.
Okay. Yeah. You see, the title, Doctor, was well, we work closely with Dr. Paul Decker, and Paul is an associate professor of linguistics at Memorial University, and Paul came up with the name of Some Stutter Law, and so really, I mean, Some Stutter means that depending how the how a non-stutterer or a person who stutters views their speech. For example, some people may think that Greg has some stutter, and so I can also say as well that that there's a lot of people around us that stutter. So there's more people that stutter. Like some stutter, my degree of stuttering versus there's some stutter. So it is a play on words. We also want to have fun with it in Newfoundland and Labrador, and the law means that some stutter law. You see this is normally an add-on, like some storm law, some meal law, some weather law. So it's more of a play on words. So really it is a play on words, like some stutter. Some people stutter, and some stutter denotes the severity of stutter. Katelyn, do you want to add anything, or?
Not really. I mean, you did a pretty good job. I took with Paul at MUN. I took a whole course on Newfoundland linguistics. So yeah. It's funny because Paul's not from Newfoundland, but he came up with this name with the Newfoundland characteristics in it. But yeah, no, it's just basically a play on Newfoundland's characteristics of the Newfoundland English dialect, especially the la. Like that is, some people read that and they're like, I have absolutely no idea what that means.
Yeah.
And we just kind of laugh at that because it's funny. And like I can hear my grandmother with her thick Newfoundland accent saying this title in the back of my head whenever I read it.
Yeah. So
thank you for explaining the name. I like it, but as someone who's not from that area, I wasn't aware of the subtleties of it. So
it's an excuse for us to talk about Newfoundland culture and share that with other people, which we always love.
I love it. And obviously, as a linguist, I was interested in how it came around.
Thanks again, Doctor. But we look forward to having you back again. Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much. Take care of yourselves.
Some Stutter La, Newfoundland and Labrador's first podcast about stuttering, has so much to talk about. Let's start listening.
This has been an episode of Some Stutter La, Newfoundland and Labrador's first podcast about stuttering. Some Stutter La is hosted and produced by Greg O'Grady, Katelyn Mayo, Dr. Paul Decker, Melanie Crane, Emily Murphy, and Luca Dinu. Some Stutter is available on Anchor, Spotify, Breaker, Google Podcasts, Pocket Cast, and Radio Public. You can also check out the Some Stutter channel on YouTube to ask a question, send us a comment or suggestion, or just to get in touch. Find us online at Some Stutter Podcast on Instagram or Some Stutter Pod on Facebook. Thanks for listening.